Welcome to our series of lectures. I hope all of you were here last time. Is there anyone new here? You are new, huh? Nice. Okay. We had 3 talks earlier, and all the 3 talks we were talking about the Buddha. It's very important to understand who a Buddha is. Buddha is not just the name of a person, it's a kind of title which means the awakened one. So, the awakened one is not an ordinary person. And this is why the Buddha was not just a philosopher like Socrates or Plato or any of those people like that. A Buddha, the way we spoke of the Buddha represents a higher level of the evolution of the human being. So we said the human being has to evolve further. And when this human being evolves beyond what we see today, the person gains certain psychic powers, which is somewhat like the Superman that we see on movies. So the Superman, of course, seems to be having some of the weaknesses of the ordinary human beings. And the Superman, according to the movies, is a person who has come to this earth from another planet. But here, when we speak of the Buddha, we are speaking of a human being who is born in this world, on this earth, but who has evolved beyond the normal level. And he had gained certain psychic powers. And it is with these psychic powers that he speaks about the universe, the worlds around, even this talk about karma and rebirth. All this is done through his psychic powers. Today we have heard of Edgar Cayce. Now, even he is supposed to be able to talk about other lives. But here the Buddha is even beyond that. He has been able to travel in space, not through machines, but simply through psychic powers. He could vanish from here and appear in another place. That sort of thing. It's not just imaginary things. There are some people today just sit and say, I went to such and such a country and now I am able to report what is there. But the body still remains here. But that's not the kind of thing that the Buddha did. He could vanish from here and appear in another place. Not only that, he could simply disappear and he could pass through walls. He could walk on water, plunge into earth, even things like that. And also he could create several bodies, and he could have a body here and a body in another place. Or he could have several bodies here itself. So it's like that. And also he had psychic memory, where he could recall past lives. He could also see other worlds and other beings. And it was a kind of vision, like X-ray vision, or telescopic vision, microscopic vision. That sort of vision he had. Also, he could hear sounds that ordinary people can't hear. He could read others' minds, the thoughts. So things like that. Of course, beyond that, during the time of the Buddha, there were other yogis who had powers like this. It was not only the Buddha, but he went beyond that in understanding and seeing directly how the mind works. And that was the main thing. It was a psychological or mental transformation. He became awakened from a dream. In other words, we are all dreaming. We are dreaming that we are existing. That we are existing in a world. The self existing in the world. This is what modern existential philosophers have been talking about. That problem that they were trying to solve, the Buddha solved that problem, the problem of existence. And he also, through this, became immortal. Now that immortality was not eternal life, because he saw that life and death are not opposites. Death is a part of life. Birth is the beginning and death is the end of life. So wherever there is life, there is birth and death. To speak of eternal life is unrealistic. But he found immortality not by seeking eternal life, but by freeing himself from the delusion of existence. So that was the dream of existence. He woke up from that. Now those things we'll be discussing later on, but I just mentioned to point out that the Buddha was not an ordinary person. He went beyond the normal human being. It was a supernormal state. And it is with this supernormal powers of the mind that he began to speak about the universe. And when he spoke about this universe, if we begin to examine what he said, whatever he said has been confirmed by modern science, astronomy. So that the teachings of the Buddha never went against scientific concepts or scientific thinking, whereas most other religions are going against science. Buddhism is the only religion that is quite in line with the scientific way of thinking. So it's very important to understand that. So today we hope to discuss the subject of cosmology. So cosmology is the cosmos, which is about the universe. Now the Buddha didn't go to speak about the universe by just choosing that as a topic, because at that time people didn't know much about the universe. So he doesn't speak about things unknown to the normal people. If he was here today, he could have spoken of many things, that because today people know certain things because of the discoveries of modern astronomy and modern science. But at that time people didn't know, but he had to use certain words familiar to the people so that people would accept what he said. Otherwise people would think he is just talking nonsense. So what happened was, the Buddha was speaking about a former Buddha. Now a Buddha means there are many Buddhas in the past. There have been many Buddhas, and there will be many Buddhas in the future. What it means is that the human beings from time to time evolve in this way, and that is how a Buddha comes into being. And there are some Buddhas who are able to teach others and help others to awaken from that dream of existence. But there are also Buddhas who are not able to do that. Just like there are teachers who, like mathematicians, who can solve very difficult problems, but they are not able to teach other people. They find it difficult to teach. So in a similar way, there are Buddhas who are not able to teach others. They are called the Pacceka Buddhas, or solitary Buddhas, because they don't have disciples. But these teacher Buddhas who are able to teach others, they are very rare. Even other Buddhas are rare, but it's very rarely that a teacher Buddha arises in the world. So Gautama, the Buddha, is supposed to have been a teacher Buddha of that kind. So he spoke about a former teacher Buddha, and he said that he was able to go to the world of Mahabrahma. Now that word Mahabrahma was the Indian word for the modern word God with the capital G, who is supposed to be the creator of the world. Now the Buddha was not an atheist in the sense that he didn't deny that there was a person like that. He said, there is a person, but he is not the real creator of the world, although he believes that he is the creator of the world. And it is also the custom of the Buddhas. A Buddha is a person who is far above that creator, God. That he visits through his psychic powers. He could visit that world which could be called heaven, where this Maha-Brahma lives. So he visits this world. And when he visited the world, this former Buddha, he also had a disciple who had psychic powers. He also visited with him. And then two other disciples who also had psychic powers went. So there were 4 people there. And so the Buddha addresses this creator, Maha-Brahma, and points out, of course, at the beginning, that Maha-Brahma is very proud, and he doesn't believe that a human being can come to his world and speak to him. But still these 4 people had come. So he challenges the Buddha and says, well, I am all powerful. I am able to do many things. I can become invisible to you. And so the Buddha says, well, you can try to be invisible, but I will point to you. I will be able to see you. So this Maha-Brahma took various different forms to become invisible, but the Buddha was able to point to him. There you are. And then, of course, the Buddha said, I will become invisible to you. And then he became invisible to the Maha-Brahma, and Maha-Brahma could not point to him. Then, of course, having done that, he told him that even the Maha-Brahma was also a human being once. And because he had been purifying his mind, he has been born in this world as the Maha-Brahma. He didn't believe it. Then he spoke about this old memory. He helped him to recall that. And when he recalled that, he agreed with the Buddha. And then, now this whole thing sounds like a myth to you, but as you go along you'll be able to see what this is all about. So when the Mahabrahma realized that it was true that he had been living in a former life as a human being, and he is simply in this cycle of rebirths called samsara, traveling from life to life. So he is still within that cycle. And so after he was convinced, he of course he took refuge in the Buddha. And when that whole conversation was over, just to show the powers of the human mind, which has evolved to that level, he asked the chief disciple with psychic powers to speak or recite a verse to be heard by the whole universe. And of course, after that they came back to earth, and the Buddha asked the disciples on earth whether they heard this sound, and they said, yes, we heard it. So that was the story related by the Buddha about this former Buddha. Then the disciple Ananda asked a question. This is in the sutras. And this question was, well, I like to know how far my teacher, the Buddha, Gautama, how far he could speak to be heard. How far can he be heard? Then he says, well, the powers of a Buddha you cannot understand. It's very difficult for you to understand the powers of a Buddha, so don't ask me that question. But the disciple Ananda was not satisfied with that, so he asked again for the second time. And second time also he said, don't ask me that question, you can't understand that. But he asked the third time, please tell us, we'll try to understand as far as we can, just tell us in a simple way. Then the Buddha said, you have asked me this question for the third time, so I am going to tell you. But if you don't understand, don't ask me any further questions. And he said, those days people didn't know much about the universe as today. So he said, do you know that there are many suns in this world other than this sun that we see? He said no, because they didn't know about this. And he said, this sun also moves, and it keeps on moving within a certain limited space. There are many suns, thousands of suns. And that collection of suns is the first world unit or universal unit, he said. Now we can simply take it as a myth, or we can think in terms of modern astronomy. What he was really referring to was what is today called a galaxy. You know what a galaxy is. Now, according to the modern way of thinking, this sun, of course, there are planets moving around the sun, and that is called the solar system. And there are many solar systems going around, and that whole collection of solar systems is what is called a galaxy. And our galaxy is what is called the Milky Way. And there are other galaxies also like that. So here the Buddha was speaking about the galaxy as the world unit. So galaxy is just a unit, and there are so many galaxies like that. And then he said, there are groups of galaxies, he said. Some galaxies are double the size of this group of galaxies, or three galaxies together, or 4 galaxies together, 5 galaxies together, like that. And then he spoke of a group of 10 galaxies. And then he spoke of group of 100 galaxies, or 10 times, maybe 10 times 10 galaxies, like that. So it goes on. And then he said, a Buddha is able to speak, to be heard through many such levels of galaxies. So this disciple Ananda, he was not satisfied with that. He wanted to ask a further question. He asked, how do you manage to do that? How do you send this sound? How do you send out this sound? Then he said, well, you won't be able to understand what I say, but because you asked this question, I will say it. I can send a ray of light or a beam of light, and through this beam of light I can send the sound. Now you see that explanation. Today modern scientists are able to speak about things like that. How they can send sounds like that. And today, of course, we also find wonderful things like radio and television and ways of sending electromagnetic waves. When we speak about light, it is an electromagnetic wave that we are sending. And when we hear of the modern physics, we hear of things like this, various things. If you have read books about the modern discoveries. So why I had to mention this is to point out that here we are not just talking about myths, we are talking about real scientific things which is confirmed by modern science. Once the Buddha had two chief disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana. If you are familiar with those names, you'll know that Sariputta and Moggallana. Sariputta was the one who was advanced in understanding the Dhamma, the teachings, and who is also able to explain the Dhamma. Moggallana was advanced in psychic powers. So once these two disciples were staying at one place with other monks, and the Buddha had gone far away to another place. And one day, Moggallana, the disciple with psychic powers, comes to where Sariputta was. And Sariputta says, "Oh, your face looks very pleasant and very serene and happy. Did you meet the Buddha by any chance? Or did you speak to the Buddha?" He says, "Yes, I met the Buddha and spoke to the Buddha." Then he asked, "How did you meet the Buddha? Buddha lives far away now. Did the Buddha come to you through psychic power and speak to you? Or did you go to the Buddha through your psychic powers and meet him?" He says, "No, the Buddha didn't come to me. I did not go to the Buddha." "Then how did you speak?" "Well, the Buddha saw me and I saw the Buddha and we spoke. He heard what I said and I heard what he said." You see, it's something like modern telephone with picture also coming up. It's something like that. But all this is done through psychic powers. So we have several stories like that in the sutras. But all this is not just a myth, as some people think, because most of these modern religions are filled with mythology. But the teaching of the Buddha is not just myth in that way. Although there are wonderful things, like some people thought they were miracles. These are not seen as miracles. These are seen as all natural happenings based on psychic powers that human beings could develop. So this is, of course, done through meditation, that the human being can evolve to a certain level. So I had to say these things mainly because to point out that the Buddha knew certain things about the universe that ordinary people didn't know. So when the Buddha, there are other sutras also where the Buddha speaks about the universe in different ways. If you are interested, you could read some of these sutras in the now some sutra translations are available. What is called the Majjhima Nikaya, or the middle-length sayings, the long sutras, and I think there are about 4 books now available. When you read those sutras, you'll come across these things. And but the important thing that he spoke of was everything that he spoke of, he based on direct experience. So whatever he said was based on his experience, not just theories collected myths from other cultures or the Indian culture or anything like that. Everything that he spoke of was based on his own experience. So when he spoke about the worlds, he divided the worlds into three kinds. And this division was based on experience. Now this is important to understand what I am trying to say. When I say it is based on experience, it means that it is experiential. Now it's important to know what is meant by the word experiential. Because there is another word that comes very close to this, which is empirical. Empirical also sounds similar to experiential, but they are not the same. They are not synonyms. Empirical means what is experienced through the senses. That means seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. These are things that we experience through the senses. Those are empirical things. Now when we speak of experiential, is something more than just sensory experience. It's not just sensory experience only. It is also experienced inside us. What we experience in the form of feelings, sensations, these are also experiential. The word experiential goes a little beyond empirical. So, you begin to understand this better as we go along. The important thing is that the division was a broad division into three kinds of existence. Three kinds of experience. Sensual, experience of form, we can use that word form also, and the experience of no form. Now what this means is, we are normally in an experience of a sensual experience, in the sense that we feel three kinds of sensations: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. A feeling of pleasure, pain, and a neutral feeling. That is what is called a sensual experience. The experience of form means simply when we look, we are able to see things. For example, we see maybe a statue of the Buddha, or you might see flowers, or you might see a wall here, you might see lights. whatever you see is the form. You are seeing a form, which is, you can call it a shape also. Whatever you see. So seeing is one thing, and feeling pleasure or pain is another thing. So you might be able to see things without feeling any pleasure or pain. But normally when we see things, we either feel something pleasant or unpleasant, or maybe a neutral feeling. But we can also experience something without any forms. Like if we think of empty space. Empty space, of course, there are no objects to be seen. There are no forms. We don't see even colors. Empty space. So, the experiences in these three kinds of worlds. One kind of world you feel pleasant and unpleasant sensation. And the other kind of world you are not aware of pleasant and unpleasant sensations, but you see forms. Like objects. But the third kind of world, you don't see any forms either. You are seeing nothing. Or more detailed discussion of that, we'll first think of the kind of world with pleasant and unpleasant sensation. Again, that is also divided into three kinds. There are worlds where you experience only pain, no pleasure at all. These are called the nirayas. The nirayas are actually like the hells. What you call hells in English, or maybe purgatory. And these worlds, there is only the painful sensation. But there are changes in the degree of pain. Sometimes you get more pain, sometimes you get less pain. And the less pain, of course, is seen as pleasure at that point. So, but still it is all pain. Then there are worlds where you get only pleasure, no pain at all. Pleasure worlds, only the pleasant sensation, no unpleasant sensations at all. These are what today you could call heaven, the pleasure place. Then there is also a kind of world where there is a mixture of pleasure and pain. You get the pleasant sensation and you also get the unpleasant sensation. The human world is an example of one of the mixed worlds like this. Now when we think of the animal world, which is the animal experience, again, animals also have pleasure and pain. And there are some other worlds like what today people called spirit world. Now in Buddhism we don't speak of spirits because we don't think in terms of matter and spirit. So, but those are worlds which are invisible to the human being. But those spirits can be here, but we are not able to see. And but those who develop these psychic powers are able to see the spirit. So these are called the Preta world. Today some books translate that as hungry ghosts and things like that. But that is also a kind of world where you get both pleasure and pain. But the degree of pain is more in those worlds than pleasure. And even in the animal world there is more pain than pleasure. Now for example, we are able to see colors, our eyes are able to detect colors, whereas some animals are not able to see colors at all. It's just black and white images. So if you see a black and white TV, you will be able to see in the way that some animals see the world. So you know that to see a color TV is more pleasant than looking at black and white. So it's like that. So there is more pleasure in the human world than in the animal world. But still in the human world also you find pain. So there is a mixture of pleasure and pain. But when you are able to be born in heaven world where you get only pleasure, there are also different heavens where you get different degrees of pleasure. It's simply the pleasant sensation. Now beyond these pleasure worlds is what is called the form world. The form world is also a kind of heaven, although there are no pleasant sensations. But those who are born in the form worlds are those who have given up the desire for pleasure. Those who have meditated and purified their minds to a certain level where the desire for these sensual pleasures have been given up. There you don't get the pleasures, but you find happiness. So for this you have to understand the difference between pleasure and happiness. Pleasure is the stimulation of the senses, a sensation that you get. But happiness is a state of mind, a state free from worries, anxieties, and a calm, tranquil state of the mind. That is the happiness. So happiness is not the same thing as pleasure. So those who have been meditating and purifying their minds, you can come forward if you like. Those who have purified their minds, their desire for these pleasures have been given up, and so they enjoy a higher kind of happiness. And that world is the form world, where you have forms or shapes or things that you see, objects are seen, but you don't have any pleasant sensations as such. It's a higher kind of heaven. Now, when you go beyond this, you get a still higher level of heaven, which is a place where you don't have even forms or shapes or objects at all. It's like empty space. And that is a greater happiness, a greater peace of mind, tranquility. And to appreciate that, you have to be able to come to a point where you are tired of these pleasures and even having objects. Then you begin to see what a great happiness it is to be free of all those things. That is a higher level. So when the Buddha spoke of different kinds of worlds, he classified worlds in this way. So, when we speak of the world that we live in, or the cosmos, which is even beyond the world that we live in, other worlds, we are able to think of these various kinds of worlds. And of course, what the Buddha pointed out was that we are going from one place to another. We are not, this life is not the only life. We have been living in these worlds many times before. And we'll be living in these different worlds in the future too. But wherever we are born, now when I use the word born, it doesn't mean that it is coming out of a mother's womb. This coming out of a mother's womb is found only in the human world and in the animal world. Birth can be just appearance, sudden appearance, like a flame coming. You strike a match and a flame appears, like that. So, a person is coming into being suddenly. But this happens due to the kind of emotion we live with. This is the important thing. This is what is called karma. Karma is not some kind of mysterious force or power that is going to judge us and direct us in some way. That's not what is happening. It is simply how the emotions that we live with determine where we are going to be reborn. If we live with good emotions, we'll be reborn in good places, like the pleasure worlds, or even the form worlds and the formless worlds. But if we live with bad emotions, then we'll be reborn as animals, or in the preta worlds, those spirit worlds where we call hungry ghosts, and also in the pain worlds, the nirayas, the hell. So what the Buddha called karma The Buddha used the word Chetana. Chetana refers to the emotional state. Or we can use words like mood, the mood, or the temperament. So, this is why the Buddha says we should always be aware of our moods and always try to be in a good mood. So what is called meditation is an effort to cultivate good moods. That's what it is. Because our moods change all the time. But if we learn to cultivate good moods, that can help us to be reborn in good places instead of the bad places. But ultimately that's not the ultimate aim of the practice of the teachings of the Buddha. But that is part of it. So when we speak about karma, that's what we are talking about. So it is according to the kind of mood that we live with. If we are all the time worried, if we are all the time angry, if we are all the time greedy for things, that is a bad mood that we are carrying. That can lead us to a bad rebirth. But if we are kind, compassionate, we are thinking of others, helping others, that kind of mood will take us to a good rebirth. That's the important thing to know. And so we have been talking for about 1 hour now. So I think I will end here for today. And you could ask questions. Good time to ask questions and we can discuss this. Or if you have any other ideas to come out with, you can do so. And next day we'll discuss further about this. Today we spoke about cosmology. And if you have any other questions, we can also discuss some of these things. I am using some of the words that people use in philosophy also, and there are 2 other words associated with cosmology. One is called cosmography and cosmogony. Cosmography is a description of these various galaxies and various solar systems and various things like that, what is contained in the cosmos. Like geography, we talk about cosmography. But when we talk about cosmogony, we are talking about the origin of the universe, how it originated. Like the creation story and or the Big Bang theory and various things like that, comes under cosmogony. So that also we can talk about a little later. So Do you have anything to say or ask? Anything that is not clear? Yeah.
You mentioned that if you die and you have bad emotions, that you can go into a lesser world or maybe even a hell. Most people die usually with the bad emotions. They're in pain, or they have regret, or wish they could live longer, or wish they could live longer. So, what happens to most of the people? Do most people usually end up in a bad place, or do they end up?
That's a very good question. Once the Buddha, addressing the disciples, the monks, he took some sand into his nails and asked, which is greater, the sand in my nails or the sand on this earth? He said, the sand in your nails is very little compared to what you find on the earth. And he said, the number of human beings who die and are reborn in the bad places is like the sand on this earth here. And those who are reborn in good places, it's like the sand in my nail. So you can find out, think. Because the great majority of people, they are cultivating bad moods all the time. People are angry, people are worried and greedy. So this is why the kind of pressure, or what you call the great need to practice the teachings of the Buddha. Now there are some who say, well, for the Christians there is a great urge to be practicing the right thing because the end of the world is coming, or the judgment day is coming. We have only one life, and so we have to go to hell or to heaven, and so we have to be it's an urgency there, or emergency. But for the Buddhists, they have many lives to live. They can do whatever they like and do it very slowly. But that is not true. Because the Buddha pointed out that it's like you have to work like a man whose hair is on fire. If a person's hair is on fire, that person will rush somewhere to get water and put his head on there. So it's like that all the time we are producing bad emotions. So it is very easy to cultivate bad emotions. It is very difficult to cultivate the good emotions. So there is an urgency here. The urgency is that any moment we don't know what time we are going to die. Any moment we can die. And therefore it is very important to have the correct frame of mind, to purify the mind. And it is through a conscious effort that we have to purify the mind. Because through an unconscious process, the mind becomes polluted all the time. And that happens not consciously, but unconsciously. Now this is what Freud was also talking about when he spoke about the unconscious and the instincts. That unconsciously our mind is filled with all kinds of emotions. It is only by becoming conscious of this that we can purify the mind. This whole process that Freud calls psychoanalysis is an effort to make conscious what is unconscious, to make the unconscious conscious. That's what he pointed out. So that the important thing is to become conscious. So the whole process of meditation is an effort to become conscious of the thoughts that we are thinking all the time. And then consciously removing the bad thoughts and consciously cultivating good thoughts. It becomes a habit. Bad thoughts become a habit. So we have to break that habit by becoming aware of our thinking. Yeah? What's that?
How does that occur? How do you do that?
How do you purify the mind?
Yeah, so the negative things aren't controlling my mind and the good things are...
Yeah. Well, we'll be discussing that in detail later, but just to answer your question, there is what is called the Noble Eightfold Path. Have you heard of that? That is the method. That is simply the method. It's not, some people think it's a set of rules like the Ten Commandments. It's not a set of rules at all. It's a technique, a method of purifying the mind. And that method begins with what is called the Samma Ditti, right understanding. Usually people translate it as right view or right understanding. But I translate it as the harmonious perspective. The Samma Ditti. Samma means harmonious, not just right. And the harmonious perspective. Now when I use the word perspective, that means you can look at a thing from different angles, different ways. So we have to look at our life from a different angle. It's only when we look at it from that angle that we are able to see things in the proper way. So that is why it's the perspective. The normal perspective is not correct. So we have to have the right perspective. Harmonious perspective. Harmonious means the opposite of conflict. Because our mind comes in conflict with other people's minds. Now if I have a desire for something and another person has the desire for the same thing, then we have to fight. So that is not a harmonious perspective. If I have certain views about life or the world, and another person has a different kind of view, then we come in conflict. So that's not a harmonious perspective. And the other thing is our emotions begin to cloud our thinking. That's why they say love is blind. And not only love, even anger is blind and fear is blind. All emotions are blind. And when we are dominated by emotions, then we can't see things as they are. So, in other words, our mind comes in conflict with reality. So the harmonious perspective is the perspective where we don't come in conflict in this way. So there is a conflict within, which people like Freud spoke of. That conflict within is the conflict between our emotions and our reason, really. Our reason tells us that we should live in a certain way, but our emotion says no, and we go in another direction. And then we repent later. Oh, we should have done the other way. So this kind of conflict means that that is not the harmonious perspective. So when we have the harmonious perspective, all conflict disappears. And we come in harmony with others, we come in harmony with reality, and all conflict disappears. The mind calms down. Yeah?
I have a question. You're talking about life after death. Where does nirvana come in?
Well, that's also a good question. The nirvana also we'll be discussing later. But nirvana simply means, in a very short, nirvana. Nir means it's a negative prefix like non. Vana means movement. So, non-movement. What is non-movement? It is stillness. It's the stillness of the mind. But nirvana simply means the mind that can never be shaken. So in other words, the mind that is free of all these emotional excitements, is free of emotional excitements, the tranquil state of the mind. I call it the imperturbability of mind. That's the meaning of nirvana. What's that?
You're talking of emptiness. Does that fall into nirvana form?
Emptiness?
Yes.
Did I use that word, emptiness?
You said there was nothing. There was
Oh, no, that's another kind of world. That is not nirvana. No. Nirvana is not a world that you can go into like heaven. Nirvana is not going anywhere. Nirvana is the stopping of all movement. So mind stops all movement. Our mind is always trying to go somewhere. That's the problem. And so we have desires and hopes. And so this is what is creating all the problems. So when the mind is tranquil and you don't need to go anywhere, and you stop going. Yeah?
How important is it to pay attention to your dreams when you fall asleep and you dream at night, especially if you're dreaming that you're going to other worlds, or if you're dreaming about something that seems so intense, it seems that it's almost real?
Well, it's a good question. The thing is that dreams was a thing that Sigmund Freud used in his psychoanalysis, because a dream is an unconscious process. So his effort was to understand the unconscious. And analyzing dreams was helpful for him to understand the unconscious. But we are not really trying to understand the unconscious in Buddhism. We are trying to become conscious. Right? Because everything is happening unconsciously. All the evil, all the bad emotions, all that is coming unconsciously. So it's only by becoming conscious that we become free of the unconscious. So this whole process is achieved by really following the Noble Eightfold Path, which begins with this harmonious perspective. That's why this harmonious perspective is really to understand the problem. Without understanding the problem, you cannot solve the problem. So once you have understood the problem, then you can begin to solve the problem. But here the Buddha laid down the problem in the form of the Four Noble Truths. Dukkha, the suffering, the unhappiness, the cause of the suffering, the ending of the suffering, and the way to end the suffering. So the way to end the suffering is the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is why it's important to understand this first. When you have understood the problem, then you can find out how to solve it. Yeah?
What does Buddhism say about the origin of this world? Like where
I don't hear you properly. Can you say it a little louder?
Yes. What does Buddhism say about the origin of this world? Where this world comes from? If Buddha had something to say about that.
Well, that is also a good question. I was waiting for that question. No one asked that question. So, at least you asked that question. So, this is the one that I was talking about when we spoke of cosmogony. We were discussing the cosmos. The Buddha spoke of the origin in two ways. But today people who write books, they have never understood this. So they say the Buddha never answered this question, or that the Buddha was silent on this question. That is not true. It was this question that the Buddha really tried to explain to people. The beginning. It's very important. But the important thing is, that beginning is very different from the way you hear of the beginning in the Bible, the story of Genesis. But this beginning, one important point we have to understand. Now, everyone says that everything must have a beginning. And it is on that assumption that people ask for the beginning. If everything must have a beginning, then you cannot have a first beginning. Because the first beginning also must have a beginning. That's the important thing to understand. And therefore, there is no real first beginning. But everything has a beginning. But there is no ultimate beginning. So in other words, this is a cycle. It's always going in the form of a cycle. Like if you ask the question, which came first, the chicken or the egg? The common question. There is no answer to that. You cannot have the chicken without the egg. You cannot have the egg without the chicken. So it's always like that. If you ask, how did the rain come? You'll have to say, the rain came from the clouds. And if you ask, from where did the cloud come? You say it came from maybe the ocean, the water evaporated and became clouds. And if you ask, where did the water come from? The ocean. You might say it came from the rivers, or the rivers brought water into the ocean. But where did the river get the water? It came from the rain. So it goes back again. So everything happens like that. So in a similar way, today people, when they speak about the cosmos, now they have discovered that when they started looking at the sky with the telescope, they began to see that the stars are gradually separating very slowly. And they have now come to the conclusion that the universe is expanding gradually. And now they are beginning to say that there was ultimately, at the first beginning, there was just nothing, and gradually a small explosion took place, which is called the Big Bang. And now gradually it's expanding like that. And they don't know what's going to happen after that. So there are various theories about this. But they don't know what happened before the Big Bang. And they don't know what is going to happen after it started expanding. But the Buddha spoke about this. That's the important thing. He pointed out that the universe keeps on expanding like that and ultimately comes to a stop, because there is a maximum limit to that, and it stops, stays there for a while, and then it begins to contract again. And it contracts, and then it completely comes to a small dot and then disappears. And there will be a time when the universe is absent. But then again it begins to start. Again it starts, and the explosion takes place, and again it begins to expand, and so it continues in the form of a cycle. That whole cycle is what is called a kalpa. There is a word used, kalpa. The expansion is called the vivatta kalpa, and the contraction is called samvatta kalpa. In other words, that whole cycle is divided into 4 parts. The expansion part, then when it has stopped expanding, it will remain for a while. That's the second part. And then the contracting part, the third part, and the complete disappearance of the universe, which is the 4th part. That whole cycle is called a Mahakalpa. A Mahakalpa. Now the word kalpa is translated today as aeon. So it's the great aeon is that whole cycle. And each of the 4 parts is called Asankhya Kalpa. Asankhya means countless. I don't know, whatever you use to measure time, it cannot be really measured because it's such a long time. So someone asked the question, can you explain how long a kalpa is? So he made use of an analogy. He used many analogies. One of those analogies was a thing like this. He said, imagine there is a mountain made of hard rock, 100 miles long, 100 miles broad, and 100 miles tall, cubic, 1 cubic mile, 100 cubic miles. And supposing a person comes with a very soft cloth once in 100 years and comes and wipes the rock with this very soft cloth. Once in every 100 years a person comes and does this. You can imagine how long it will take for this rock to get completely wasted as a result of this wiping. That is how a kalpa is, how long a kalpa will be. So, such a long time, you can't even imagine. So, such a long time the universe will remain like that, that whole cycle. The cycle, actually this is asankhya, that countless is not the whole cycle, it's only 1/4 of the cycle. So this is one explanation of the beginning of the world, which is not ultimate beginning at all. There is no ultimate beginning. And the other thing that the Buddha pointed out was, there is another thing that we'll have to discuss later, not today, which is that what we call the world is ultimately a creation of our mind. Our mental process is creating the world. To understand this, you could even read the modern book on psychology, one of the textbooks on psychology, where they talk about the theory of perception. There is, I think, a book in the Pelican or Penguin series about the perception, theory of perception. There also you get this, that if you understand the modern theory of perception, you will see that this whole world is created by your mind, or mental process. I won't say mind, it's just the mental process that is doing that. And so, the whole purpose of the practice of the teaching of the Buddha is to understand that. There is a verse in the sutras, you get that verse, where after the Buddha's awakening, or when he became a Buddha, he's supposed to have recited the verse. But in this verse, the Buddha says, Aneka jati sansarang sandavissang anibbisang gahakarakang gavesanto dukkha jati punapuna. What it means is, I have been traveling in this samsara, which is the cycle of rebirth, for a long time, many lives. I have been going in search of the Creator, but I never met Him. I didn't meet Him. And it is very unpleasant to be reborn many times, time and again. And then he says, the second verse he says, now I have seen you, Creator. You will never create again. Your whole structure has been destroyed, and all the supports have been broken down. And then he says, Visankhara gatan chittam. The mind has stopped creating. The urge, the emotional urge that is responsible for this has been brought to an end. In other words, the Creator is your own mental process. That is the Creator. There is no other Creator creating the world. And the purpose is to stop this process of creation. Because whatever has been created, Buddha points out, it is suffering that has been created. Whatever is brought to an end, it is suffering that is being brought to an end. So the Creator cannot be a God. How can a God be creating suffering for people? So that's why from the Buddhist point of view, the Buddha becomes the savior of the world, not the creator of the world. And the Buddha becomes the God of the Buddhist, because God is the person who saves the world, not the one who creates the world. So that's it. Do you have any?
I have one more question. Which would be more important? The deeds that one has done in the past, or the current emotions and thoughts that one has now? Which would carry the most weight?
What is most important is the thoughts that you have now. What you have been doing in the past is unimportant, because it is done. You can't do anything about it. And if there are any consequences of that, you have to suffer the consequences. But still, if you can cultivate good thoughts now, you can avoid suffering some other consequences. That's what it is.
So if you, let's say, had, I don't know, say like in our system of justice, they seem to have this idea of wanting to make you feel guilty, imposing guilt, or you should feel guilty about this. You should feel bad because something happened in your past or something that your ancestors did. This is a very negative and bad emotion then to...
Well, that feeling of guilt is based on this concept of sin. This is what is found in Christianity, not in Buddhism. You see, the concept of sin is something that is very important in Christianity, that the human being is seen as a sinner. And the human being can never come out of this sin, really. It can be done only by God, by forgiveness. God can forgive the sin. And the human being can't do anything other than that. Just to pray to God and ask Him to forgive. But in Buddhism is not based on the idea of punishment and reward. This is very important. Some people, when they write books on Buddhism, they use the word karma to say that karma is a law of punishment and reward. That's not true. There is no punishment and reward in karma. Now, if you drive in the wrong way, you can meet with an accident. But that accident is not a punishment. But if the police catches you, of course, then it can become a punishment. It is done by a judge. But meeting an accident is not a punishment. It is a consequence of bad driving. So it's the same thing, that karma is a thing like that. Karma is not a punishment. But if you cultivate bad karma, which is bad emotion, then of course you'll have bad consequences. It has nothing to do with punishment. And because it has nothing to do with punishment, you don't have to feel guilty. It's only if it is punishment, you can think about guilt. So there is nothing to feel guilty about karma. It's simply to be aware of the bad consequences and to guard yourself against wrong driving. Yeah.
When you were talking about worlds, what is this world that we're living in? Is this the world of pain, pleasure?
I told you this is a mixed world.
It's a mixed world.
Mixed world of pleasure and pain.
An action without egocentric urge, would that be without karma?
That egocentric urge is what is called tanha, usually translated as craving. All emotional urges are egocentric. They are self-centered. And that is what is called tanha, which is the cause of all suffering and evil. So, the purpose of the teaching of the Buddha is to completely remove that egocentric urge. But the another point there, you see, that this egocentric urge is a thing that is necessary for the preservation of life. That the whole theory of evolution is based on a struggle for existence and the survival of the fittest. Now that struggle for existence is this egocentric urge. So this is why at the beginning I said that this whole process of evolution itself is creating the problem, which is an effort to survive, which is to become permanent in an impermanent world. So the whole process of life is an effort to become permanent in an impermanent world. And that is never achieved. It's a failure. Because every individual who is born has to die. So you can never become permanent. So what we have is only an effort to be permanent. And this urge to be permanent, the urge to survive. But every time it's a failure. Every individual has to die. What survives is simply what is called the species. It is the generation. But what is the purpose of the generation continuing? The continuation of a generation is the continuation of suffering. Huh?
If existence was considered real and not a dream.
Yeah, but people are thinking we are existing. And we are also thinking we want to exist further. We don't want to die. So as long as we have that delusion in the mind, we'll be suffering. It's only by freeing the mind of that delusion that suffering comes to an end. That's the problem. You have something to say? Yeah?
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Good to see you too. Any more questions? Well, this is something that you should think about and meditate on. And when you come next time, we'll be talking something more about this. We see, I have some words that I am using. Some words are being used mainly in Christian theology also. Like the next topic is what is called eschatology. Eschatology deals with life after death, which we discussed in a small way today, but we can discuss further next time. And what happens, more about karma and rebirth. And after that, there is another word that is not found in every dictionary, only some dictionaries. Word called soteriology, which is dealing with the idea of salvation in Christianity. But we speak about nirvana. That is the salvation. So first we talk about the karma and rebirth next time. More details about how rebirth takes place and how the different kinds of karma. So you have any more questions? No more questions. That's good. That means you have understood. So I'll chant a blessing to bless you and bring you good health and happiness. You bring your palms together and listen with devotion. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakkantu sabba devata sabba buddhanubhavena sada sotti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakkantu sabba devata sabba dhammanubhavena sada sotti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakkantu sabba devata sabba sanghanubhavena sada sotti bhavantu te. May you all be well and happy, peaceful. Thank you.